Welcome to the show, the Suicide Prevention Show, where we're making suicide a thing of the past. And I am super excited that you're here. You are in for a treat. Our guest this episode is none other than Greco. And we are going into a conversation that nobody wants to talk about and that we absolutely must. So, everything you never wanted to know about this topic, no topic is off limits on this show. And so be prepared to participate. Here we go. So, Anne, there you are. It's Miracle. How are you?
Jackie.
How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. And I want to just greet the listeners, and so happy here to be with you. And thank you for investing in this mission and in your time, in yourselves. So really great.
Yes, we do appreciate everyone who's taking the time to participate by showing up, listening in, maybe even leaning in. You might learn a thing or two, but now we're going to take them on this journey. And tell everybody, not just me, but let's talk about how you ended up doing what you do and what you've learned along the way, because you're in a unique position in this field.
Okay, I am a clinician. That's my background. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I've been doing that for about 18 years, which really qualifies me to talk about the topic, have a lot of examples of case studies if they become relevant during our conversation today. I also am a solopreneur, so I really resonated a lot with the previous conversation. A lot of what Steve had to say was really fabulous. And even the first person who talked about happiness spent a lot of time talking about those things as well. And what brought me here is that, Jackie, you and I had a conversation, and I work with a broad spectrum of people. I have not stopped working. The way things have changed socially and in our society, have lots of people coming in to have conversations, and there has been an increase in people's feelings of hopelessness, people's feelings of sadness, and coping with uncertainty. And I think what we came up with that we talk about with everybody today is the ability to have difficult conversations for one reason or another. And a lot of you out there may have understood and been faced with a situation where you have had to have a conversation that you thought about and maybe thought twice about, and then maybe even hesitated. And if you're like Jackie and I, more than likely you read all the literature, you conducted a full-blown literature review, and you consulted all of the people that you know in your network to make sure it was viable before you set out. So if you have that perspective, you are not alone. And that's a key element in what the subject we're talking about today is. You are not alone. So
there we go. All right. So even in the topic of suicide, you're not alone. And the biggest challenge in the area of suicide is that suicide is a very lonely activity. It comes from a complete place of disconnect and aloneness. And so that's the one thing, that was one of the first things that I had to learn about suicide in order to go on this mission. And this is a very personal mission for me. And what pulled you into this field?
I think that I have always wanted to help people. I've always been interested in how people work, how they operate. It's just something that seemed very interesting to me in and of itself. And certainly I'm part of that. I think that I cope with a lot of things on a day-to-day basis. You know, I have a strong commitment to work on my own stuff. I am a work in progress. And I'm really interested in people being able to be open about lots of topics, including the issue of suicide, managing a major mental health condition like depression, anxiety, and even mood swings. And as I moved closer to the topic in my journey, I realized that it really was a fit. It was really a way that I could empower people and make a difference. And I will warn you, some of the things that I'm going to say may be kind of unusual, only because I look at people who consult in mental health, who want to talk about it, are the healthiest people, where people say, oh, if we talk about that, there's some sort of an issue. Actually, everyone else in my world is out on the loose, and the people who are healthiest are in talking about it in some way, shape, or form.
Well, that was really interesting because when I was doing my research for the TEDx stage, I realized that there's a little line in the Center for Disease Control's information on suicide that says that the inability to talk about suicide is actually in and of itself a risk indicator.
Yeah.
And I went, oh, and I came from the other side, the other side of the spectrum. After my daughter's attempts, and she was, counseling, therapy, medications, interventions, hospitalizations, we did it all. And when we were done, it was sort of like, okay, we're done. We don't have to talk about that anymore, because heaven forbid I should put the thought back into her head.
Mm-hmm.
And then I hit that line in the Center for Disease Control, and I went, holy crap, that mythology could have cost me my kid, because it was just a myth that you could put the thought back in their head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the assessment of suicide, if I have somebody who comes in my office, I will ask them in a depression screening if that is an issue. And for some people, it happens when the depression becomes elevated. It is actually something that we monitor to notice the severity in terms of mild, moderate, or severe depression. For other people, though, that is their baseline. And I'm basing what I say on my experience of 16 years and working in a practice with 2 psychiatrists and seeing people on psychiatric medication and how they look and how they operate with depression. And for some of them, their baseline, even with medication management, was an intermittent form of suicidal thinking. And so as a result, then we have to basically go into more detail, which it might be beyond the scope of this interview, into what constitutes a lethality assessment. And of course, for the purposes of our listeners and our participants today, it is about, I think it's about being connected. It's about really talking to somebody you love and really being interested in what is going on out there. And somebody said it on Facebook. It was a beautiful share from my friend Catherine Marshall, and it is people are coping with a lot of things that they are not talking about. And unless we can bridge the subject, make it comfortable, make it easy, make it something that it is acceptable to bring up, they will continue to just hold it right back in. And of course, the internalization of those feelings and those thoughts can elevate the symptoms of depression and anxiety. And of course, I'm going to say a really dirty word. It's a 4-letter word now. I'm going to get into it. Jackie, jump right in, is risk. With all of these things that we're talking about, we're really talking about risk assessment and risk management. And of course, like so many things going on in this day and age and in general with mental health, is there's a risk assessment scale. How do we measure risk? How do I know if my family member is at risk? How do I know if my finances are at risk or my business is at risk? How do I know if I'm putting myself at risk if I leave my house and basically, go visit the Fresh Market or Trader Joe's or something like that? Yeah.
We're going to unpack this one a lot. Okay.
Sure.
Because in the middle of this was lethality, which is, what's the risk of them actually taking a lethal action against themselves? Yeah, so it's what I'm assuming that meant in the middle of there.
It depends upon the person, and it also depends upon the mental state, because that changes. Somebody who is,
I was just trying to get a definition of the word, Anne.
lethality.
Yeah.
Okay, lethality. I'm so sorry. Lethality is something that could be lethal, basically.
Right.
Something that elevates the chance of dying. Yeah, go ahead.
When you're assessing the lethality in risk, it's just what are the odds that this person's going to take a lethal action? It's that kind of assessment. And one of the real big challenges is that as much as and this is full disclosure, when I started on this journey with the Teen Suicide Prevention Society, I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to talk about this side of it. I'm like, no, we don't have to talk about that. We're going to be pure prevention. We're going to talk Now, all of our work, all of our training programs of suicide prevention advocates are all in the pure prevention realm. We don't do anything in the intervention realm. But my refusal on my first summits to talk about the intervention realm was a disservice. And I didn't realize it was a disservice. And this was brought home to me on my last summit, where someone said that suicide prevention for them was a daily struggle. It was a battle with their depression. And they objected to my attitude that suicide prevention can be fun. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so this whole discussion of what's intervention and what's prevention, yeah, brought a lot of clarity into the mission over the last few weeks. And it's an ever-evolving mission. So we're talking about intervention. We're talking about assessing risk of people with a known risk factor already. They've already been either self-disclosed or someone around them has developed an awareness that there's an issue, whether they've got a diagnosis or whether there's just a disquiet on the part of a family member that says, something's not right with you. Yeah, but either way, they're known to be at risk or assumed to be at risk. And so when we're looking at that, Anne, and when my personal opinion, this is the realm of trained intervention specialists. This is not a place for a family member to try to fix this or figure it out. This is, at the bare minimum, the 800 number that we put out, and we'll put it out again, which is the for the suicide prevention hotline in the United States. And don't worry, Katie's on it. She'll put it in the chat. The other piece of this is that then there's the professionals like yourself. And when we're talking about suicide, we're talking about lethal intent. And I try to be really, really clear, because people are like, especially when it comes to teens, there's a lot of confusion about, it's a cry for attention. And I'm going, are you talking about suicide attempt, or are you talking about, self-injury? Because there's this spectrum, and it's all about intent. Mm-hmm. And so let's go there. Let's help some family people and friends unpack this. Is there a difference in how a family member could, or maybe this is an appropriate place to use the should word, is there a difference in how they would respond to something that they believe has lethal intent and something that they don't think has lethal intent?
Well, if there is any doubt about safety, it is very important for everyone to know, and it's okay, that you won't overreact in this case if you have a concern to seek help. And if there is something going on in the home that is of a certain level of intensity, and right on the heels of lethality, we talk about violence, in the home, or other types of behaviors that are, they have high risk behaviors. You would want to contact someone, whether it is to dial 911 in a really severe case. The other part of it would be if you can take someone to the emergency room. Now I'm talking about after hours, things are closed, it's on the weekend, because that's when that kind of thing usually happens. At the same time, in the home, there's lots of things that people and family members can notice, changes in sleeping, changes in eating. Some of those are really simple. Loss of motivation, loss of interest in daily activities. If somebody was really good at doing school and there was a decline in their attention and their ability to engage in their studies, it might be time to just find resources, find out qualified people to discuss it with, find ways to socially involve and offer support for teens. And I did want to mention that for men and teenagers, a lot of times depression may not look like I can't get out of bed. What you're going to see is a lot of irritability, a lot of negativity, and you're going to see a sharp increase in that. And basically, also, you'll have to determine if counseling is actually the correct intervention for them.
Well,
That is talking face to face. Yeah.
How would you said you have to determine, and the answer is no. A family member doesn't, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, you would have
family
to.
Member has to get help because
Yeah. You'd have to check in. Absolutely, you'd have to check in, and just so that everyone doesn't get what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking a couple of steps ahead. You say you're going to schedule the appointment. You bring them in, and individual counseling just maybe even group may not be the intervention for them, meaning there's lots of therapies. There's equine assisted therapies, there's art therapies, there's game therapies, there's a lot of other treatment modalities to be able to look into and check into that can offer if they can't talk. Because you stumbled on something that I think is a good one to really mention and kind of highlight a bit, is that people have difficulty sometimes discussing it when it's going on in here and in here. And so as a result, they may not want to open up and really verbalize all of these things. So if you put them in a setting in front of a medication provider for psychiatric meds or a counselor therapist, they will sit and they will not know how to engage or make it productive, and it will be difficult for them. So
it's not a one size fits all world.
It never has been. Yeah.
It's not a one size fits all world. And what we know to be true is that we're all at risk at some level. This is the final conclusion that I had to come to when I was doing the research. And what I came up with was an acronym, WAAR, WAR with 2 A's. And it's we're all at risk. And from that perspective, then it's a lot easier to normalize the conversation, because it's not that there's something wrong with me. That's normal to have somewhere on the spectrum. We're all at risk. We're all somewhere on the spectrum, on this continuum. And so because of that, it's okay. It makes it a little easier to have the conversation. So as you know, that's what I teach. I teach people who are not mental health professionals, who are not in the intervention realm. I teach them how to safely, calmly, easily help people break the silence. And it's people who don't know they're at risk, who don't have any known risk factors, and they all volunteer for the conversation. If you've got a family member who you think needs a conversation, at that point, you've crossed the line. We are no longer talking pure prevention. Now we're talking intervention. And now you're going to be working with somebody like Ann. So, at least some place to get started. And thank you for popping that into the chat. So, Ann, I loved what you said. If you have a situation where there's a potential for risk, you cannot overreact. That was like, okay, yay, everybody, write that down. You cannot overreact. And you don't have to use big fancy words. You can talk to your loved one. You don't have to be talking in terms of big scary things like anxiety and depression. You can say, notice some mood swings. We're starting to swing. Let's talk about it. Yeah. I mean, it can be that simple. And so I love the fact that you were able to bring that kind of language into this conversation that can be so fraught with, so full of long, multi-syllable words which I love to make fun of and call them multisyllabic. Words that have a lot of different syllables in them, and people get intimidated. All right, let's go there. We're going to go where angels fear to tread. What are the top 5 reasons people will not seek professional help or intervention?
I think that there could be a generational conversation, a family conversation around it. That is just something we don't talk about because there is something wrong. I think that's number 1. Number 2 is that I believe that people will, especially in a state of depression, they will feel isolated and alone. And the more they engage in that type of cycle, they isolate, the less they're around people, the less they want to be around people, the more they feel that they are alone and that nobody else understands and could understand what's going on with them. I definitely think that changes, things that seem to fall apart, that could be right now employment. So I have a little like number 3, I think, with an A, B, C, D. That could be issues with work, not having work. It could be a bad breakup.
So we're not talking about causes here for a second. I'm asking, what are the reasons they would not seek help?
Oh, that they would not seek help.
That they would not seek help. And you nailed it with the first 2.
First 2. Oh, yeah, I just got off track. Okay. So another reason would be money. They have an irrational belief that there is not help and support out there. Another one is their reputation. They may feel that they have a reputation among others to stand up to a certain level and worried about other people thinking about it. Another thing is that fear.
Fear of what?
Fear of lots of things. Fear of what happens if they start to open up and explore what's happening with them. Fear of having to say that I'm confused and I need help to figure this out. So that's the one that has the A, B, C, D. It could be lots of things. Worry that if they open this up, it will snowball into something larger and they just don't want to go there.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. And I was going to say, when you started talking, I went, oh yeah, they could absolutely be afraid of the label, that there's something wrong with them, that that they'll get a diagnosis, and then now all of a sudden they have a mental health issue. And I think fear of the label is a big one. And I actually think it's really, at times, really warranted, because we live in a society that looks at labels rather than at people.
Yes.
And so, if we peel back all the labels and we just started seeing people again as whole creatures, we all have our mental health challenges. Anytime that you're not in a state of bliss, joy, happiness, or effective, productive something, that you're not feeling like you're moving under your own volition, you're dealing with a mental health challenge. It's just not in the DSM, whatever number we're up to now. It's not in the diagnosis book.
Well, we call it the degree to which it impairs functioning.
Oh, that's a mouthful. I like it.
Plenty of people have anger, they have depression, they have things that they cope with, and they find a way to manage it most of the time. When it becomes unwieldy, when it becomes unmanageable, and that's where, going back to what I had inserted, I want to insert it. It's a good thing to insert. I put it in the wrong place before, but it's the timing. Something happens around them circumstantially, and then it just becomes too much.
Yeah, it's the person who's been slugging along and they're doing okay. They're doing, we're good. We're good. They might, well, in my world, FINE is an acronym for frenzied, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. So I use good instead of fine, even though it's not grammatically correct. Yeah, they're getting by.
Yeah.
But they're like the camel with all the straw. They're making it until that one last piece. Yeah, and they say the straw that broke the camel's back. It's when you've been stockpiling all of these stressors. And then one more thing comes along and it's, just more than the system can handle. The ability to be stress hardy, the ability to be resilient under stress, when we have all these things to cope with, I dislike this concept of coping skills, because I think that coping skills sound like hard work to develop. Yeah. So I'm looking for another language. What can we do that's going to make it easy and fun for people to develop some more emotional resilience so that they are less likely to have that final straw?
Okay. And as I have developed from clinical work into offering the coaching practice, my platform is about practical solutions.
Uh-huh.
It's about putting in practices, creating habits around certain things. And of course, where do I start? And this is where some of the weirdness comes in. Everybody brace yourself.
Yay.
Stress is a resource. Stress gives you a lot of data that you can collect about what's happening with you. And you can actually learn to work with that stress. And of course, for the small business owners that I work with, a lot of times the stress is their pathway to solid entrepreneurship, to increasing productivity, to increasing profit, and lots of skills, lots of conditions that we have. They just have this double edge to them, Jackie, where there is the downside, which people sort of notice and they feel the pain, ouch. And then there's the other side where it can become very powerful depending upon the place where you stand. And so the practices, if you had asked me about practices, I mean, some of them are just so simple, and it's going to sound repetitive. It's about being able to take care of yourself. It's about remembering what is the most important for yourself, for your family members, getting back to those basics. It is, and this is my wheelhouse, of course, as a cognitive behavioral therapist, is noticing the limiting beliefs and really being able to work with what limits us. Someone comes in and they are talking about saying that they're unhappy, and that will happen in my office fairly frequently. And I will say, well, let's talk a little more, like you've been saying to everybody today, let's unpack it a little bit. And let's talk about happy. Are you happy with how you look? And they're like, well, yeah, I'm happy with that. Well, are you happy with your work? Well, no, I'm not happy with that. Are you making money? Yes. Are you happy that yes, I am. Do you have a good family? Yes, I'm happy with my family. I love them, and I have this other issue. But my point is that happiness is a spectrum. And of course, if we can get to the belief system, thoughts lead to feelings, lead to behavior. This is just one school of thought in counseling. Basically, thoughts lead to feelings, lead to behavior. Then people can really put in a lot of things. And it's so tailored and specific to the individual what it is, in my experience, Jackie, but it really does create this resilience that really has them be able to just take a powerful stand around any set of circumstances that they have coming up.
Okay, so I missed a step in here. Okay, because trust me, I get the concept. I mean, for me, the cycle of results is thoughts, feelings, behaviors. Okay, so behaviors are the only thing that get you results. So that's always the piece for me, is what's the tangible that you can see. And the thoughts come from our beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of like the root of everything is our BS, our belief systems.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you're saying that, just the awareness of this gives people a more powerful place to stand.
Yes.
Okay, so if just this simple awareness that your actions are driven by your emotions, and your emotions are driven by your thoughts, and your thoughts are coming from what you believe. And when you can start asking these questions about breaking it into smaller pieces,
Mm-hmm.
you can start to see that maybe you had a belief system that said it had to be perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I'm not happy. Well, but you're happy. Then this example you gave, the person's happy with the majority of their life. There's only one piece.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh.
And what they're not, and then they start to see, well, the unhappiness is focused on something really specific. And if they can get and sort of get the distinction between I'm unhappy, blanket unhappy, to, well, here's where I'm unhappy, then can come the practical solutions that you were talking about, or that I call them practical solutions.
Mhm.
They're not coping skills, but they're ways of approaching how you're feeling.
Well, I
They're
love
ways of approaching how you do things. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I love the distinction, because the practices are just that, they're practices. You know, if I want to get good at playing the trumpet, which I did try that for a few years, it was not a happy time for the rest of the family. Yeah, but if I wanted to get good at that, I needed to practice it. So if I want to get good at having the results that I want, then I get good at the actions, but the actions have to come from this place of emotion.
Yeah.
So focusing on the practices that give me this emotional edge.
Yeah.
I really like this concept. Okay, so lay it on me. What's a practice?
So if I can, I'm just going to use the model of solopreneur, like what you were talking about with Steve. Okay, so just imagine if a solopreneur can put in 3 practices. One of them is that they were going to wake up in the morning and their first practice was to Google and research speaking gigs. Set practice. They're going to do that. Next practice, they are going to set up connection conversations. These are the people that they met in their mastermind. These are the people that they met somewhere, or they know that they are going to have just a very social conversation to find out how they can help them, how the other can help the other. And that's another block of time.
Do people still do that? Do they still have social conversations?
Oh, hell yes. Excuse me. Of course. Anyway, I hope they do. So, and then the third one is that they have their list of people. And these are the people that they haven't spoken to, but they've thought about and they want to follow up. Maybe they have had a connection with them in the past. Maybe they have worked with them, signed up for a program, and they are going to have or create, set aside a time to talk and have a sales conversation. If an entrepreneur implemented those 3 practices, how would, and this is for anyone who's on with us right now, how would they feel? What would their world look like?
So consistency counts. That's the whole purpose.
And the question is, yeah. You know, at the same time, how would that look if you had that practice? If we talk about, let's say a parent has a teen that they want, setting aside a time where they can basically sit down and talk with their teen and really have the State of the Union. Whether they do it once a week, whether they do it once every other day, you know, and don't even have to call it that, because teens like informality in my experience. They don't like hubbub, you know, just really drawing it in and really don't let them know you're doing that. Yeah. So practices can just be anything that you come up with, things that you feel led to do, drawn to do, and where to look is those things that you've been saying, I mean to do that, or I would love to do that, or I want to do that. You know, get into that world. You can get into the a little bit into the should world to snatch some of those things out of there, you know, and things that you really like that inspire you. And you can have a lot of fun too when you're adding stuff in, you know. So
you're going to have to talk to me a little bit about that, because you said should, and so now I got to know more.
Well, you grab, if somebody's been saying, you know, I should make a point to follow up with Mary. It's been 4 weeks. Well, it doesn't, for lots of people, it doesn't become reality until they put it on their calendar and they actually make that phone call. And that's the implementation about it.
All right. So a should needs to be a schedule. I can't quite get it.
I forgot you have all this stuff attached to shoulds. Okay. So basically,
if somebody's saying that they should do something, then the next step is to schedule it.
Yeah, you know, I mean, wouldn't it be nice, and how I look at it as, wouldn't it be nice, wouldn't it be fun, would it break up the boredom if I got on the phone with somebody, Murgatroyd, who I haven't really had a chance to find out how things are going, find out, you know, how her her Yorkie is doing these days, kind of thing. So
Got it. So yeah,
the first one was research for speaking gigs or networking events for anyone. And that was perfect, what they said, Katie,
that's okay.
what
I
you wrote
took
down.
care of it. So
Yeah,
yeah.
research for speaking gigs and networking events, social conversations, connection conversations, and sales conversations.
Mhm.
I know it's better to call it reach out. It doesn't sound as formidable.
Well, the reality is that we don't know how to have sales conversations anymore. And this is part of the big challenge. And so one of the things I'll be unpacking tonight when I'm pulling behind the scenes and pulling back the curtains, it's a lost art in a lot of ways. So what is it, since you're now working, I mean, you have kind of jumped ship. Okay. I mean, you left the clinical world and now you're over here in the entrepreneurial space helping business owners. And I'm going, all right, now you're doing something that most clinicians and practitioners never master for themselves, which is sales. They don't get the business side of their business because they don't think they are in business. Doctors fall into the same boat.
Yeah.
It's all business. If you're solving a problem and making money for solving a problem, that's the definition of a business.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to this, we're going to call it the psychology of sales, but not in a manipulative way, not in using psychology to bring someone into your business, whether they're a good fit or not, but the psychology that a solopreneur or an entrepreneur has to master in order to pick up the phone.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I put it as reach outs because you never know if you're going to get a person anymore. I mean, you could be reaching out 5 times before you actually hit a human, and that would be a good day.
And then and then there would be another category, and those are the booked sales calls.
Mm-hmm.
Time when and this is what we love. I don't know about anybody else, but I love it because I get to help people. I get to support them, and you're right. It isn't very salesy. It's about really making a difference for a person. Like
Mm-hmm.
if we can at all create a transformational experience, that's what makes the conversation really valuable, and if they choose to work with us, they will, but they
I
take
think,
proper choice. Yeah.
that's really what it is about. So if we take, and that's going to remove all the drama from this conversation about sales for people. What if it's a booked call? You have an appointment to talk to someone, and the purpose is to help them have whatever transformation they need next.
Mm-hmm.
And if you develop a connection, offer to help them more.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
In my opinion, that's what it is.
yeah.
And that's why it's so fun, and at the same time, do things stop people? I'm in the boat with this one because it can stop me. Things can get in the way, and how do we learn quickly? Like, I love what you said before about just really being able to zero in, identifying it, just knowing that it's there. Then you can make your plan. Then you could create practices around it because it's predictable. I mean, everybody knows sort of what the patterns are in terms of what you do, what you get involved in. And I just think it's kind of cool to be able to have strategies and different things that, well, if I do this, then I'll do that.
Well, I think we're gonna keep in that vein for just a few minutes because you said everybody knows the pattern. So just in case that there's somebody who's not everybody and that doesn't know the pattern, what is the pattern? What does it look like?
Okay, so that would mean just taking a look at what you're doing. And of course, that would be something, if they don't know, to actually ask a coach, ask somebody who you know and respect. And
you're talking about the pattern of a sales conversation now?
I'm talking about the pattern that people fall into that hold them back. The things that have them not meet a goal, or the things that eventually lead to an elevation in limiting beliefs. It leads to depression, anxiety, those kind of things, meaning that being able to know what's happening, there tangibly, is very valuable. And sometimes people can do it by journaling. That's one of the things that it's a good practice. And in my office in the counseling, it's funny because I'll ask somebody to journal, and then I'll hear the next week about how they came back and didn't journal because it was, and they feel really bad because they didn't. And I don't know that that's the best way to use journaling, but yeah. So
No, yeah, because if you're going to use it to beat yourself up, then that might not be a practice that's going to serve you. I mean, yeah, we can get into well,
yeah.
I don't even know what the right language is, but we'll call them productive practices. And if it's not productive, you don't want to practice that. Yeah.
Well, and it makes sense. I kind of like that, because what are your current practices? You would have to know to establish a baseline to be able to note progress, to notice an improvement. And certain things, this is going to be kind of interesting to drop in. I know we still have a little bit of time left.
Yeah.
Progress may not look like complete resolution. So for example, if I have someone who's having angry outbursts and they were coming in the office, I would tell people to expect to see, this is how you measure the progress. Not that they're never going to have an angry kid or an angry spouse again, but to really measure the duration, the intensity, and I just forgot the last one, duration, intensity, and frequency
There we go.
of the emotion or the negative, the behavior that people want, are expecting to change. And of course, definitely being aware and taking a look at that. And then that gives people a way to understand it. Some years ago, when children had ADHD, parents would have a lot of difficulty offering some report about how the child was doing, because there was difficulty focusing, hyperactivity, and a whole host of behaviors, interrupting adults, etc. And so if we put a framework called intensity, duration, and frequency, they could speak to what stayed the same, what got better, and what elevated. And then that, of course, helped with whatever the even though we're talking about prevention here, but that would help what would be the interventions, which are the practices. It's similar to me in my world. It's similar that it's practices. It's a set of practices you're going to put in.
Cool. Well, that we use very similar language around that, because all of the suicide prevention advocates in the training program, they have practiced conversations on the topic of suicide. And that in and of itself, breaking that silence, that's why I made it where they're all practice conversations. And this concept of I can practice something, let's go with practice, practice, practice. All right. So practicing measuring. This is something that most of us, no, I can't say that. This is something I wasn't raised with. I wasn't raised with the concept of observation for the purposes of measuring behavior change. And that in and of itself would be a huge, huge life skill. I'm going, okay, this is a good place to go. A huge life skill, whether it's for a parent to be able to actually just sort of feel some comfort around that they've got a skill set that will allow them to pick up on changes. Because it is the changes that you alluded to earlier, that's how you assess risk, is that what's changing. If you don't have a baseline, if you have, we're going to say it the positive. If you do have a baseline, if you have developed a skill of observation where you're actually able to measure and notice, this whole concept of behavior, you'll be able to tell when something changes. But without something to start with, without a baseline, it's really hard to tell, if something's changed.
And sometimes feedback really helps us set up that criteria, because when you think of the applications of what you just said, if you broaden that perspective, you can do that with anything. You can do that in any area of life, as long as you know what the criteria is, where to look, and then what a way to kind of assess or monitor what you're looking for. You can test and adjust. You can continue to work with that. That's a model. And a lot of us, it's one thing to people always talk about being a therapist, being a coach. We need as much support as everybody else. We have stellar, superior, support systems behind us, because we're working on ourselves. We're working on ourselves all the time, and still in some venues, I like to say in the media, and in the movies, we always get the label of these quirky, weird people who are the, You
No,
know,
I'm not
sometimes we
quirky.
do.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do. No, no, no. I'm talking about like how they portray therapists
I know.
in some of the movies. It's really funny. But at any rate, and the reality is, you know, sometimes things we do give credence to that view. Some of the
So
things they have
on
depict
that
are true. Yeah.
on that quirky note, you're absolutely right. You can apply this concept to everything. This idea that if you start being a little more observant, you
Mhm.
start breaking things down into duration, intensity, and frequency of behavior. Then, when we're talking about those three behaviors, where we're talking about Googling for speaking gigs and opportunities to network and interact, and we're talking about having the peer-to-peer conversations, and we're talking about having the practitioner, we're going to call it the coach to consumer,
Reach out. Yeah.
whatever that is. I call them reach outs. The potential for a sales conversation. What we're talking about there is prospects, the potential for a sales conversation. You can start noticing and tracking those things and notice whether your practice is increasing. You're actually spending more time, more discernment, more effectiveness, and out measuring it partly by the behavior. Are you actually engaging in the behavior? But also by the results you're getting.
Mhm.
Are you actually getting the names, the contact people that you could do a reach out to for a speaking gig? Because, and that's why, it's, by the way, getting a speaking gig is a sales conversation, people. We're not, sales conversations are not limited to prospects. Sales conversations happen when you're trying to figure out what to have for dinner with your family. It's all sales. And that was my tagline back when I was teaching sales, before I started teaching people how to sell themselves on staying alive. Yeah, it's still sales.
Yeah.
It's still sales. And so all of this has been absolutely wonderful. And you've given a great deal of very practical things to practice. And you have a gift for people. So that'll end up in the show notes and it'll be in the chat box. And I so appreciate that, because this ability to take a powerful stand is something that all of us can use more help with. The idea of having practical solutions to manage stress and overwhelm. And Katie took care of that for you. Oh, wow. Okay. So that's a very generous gift. And so we'll leave those in the show notes for everyone, and we will move forward with this conversation. And we'll continue the conversation, Anne, because I don't think that the world of entrepreneurialism and this conversation around self-sabotage to the point of suicide, I don't think this is a conversation that we're going to be done with anytime soon.
You're right. I think you're right.
So thank you for being willing to spend part of your day with us here on the show. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.